There are whispers in the quiet corners of the world, echoes of things we can't quite explain, things that linger just beyond the veil of our understanding, brushing against our senses in ways that make us question everything we thought we knew. Sometimes, these whispers are just that, ethereal suggestions, fleeting shadows that dance at the periphery of our vision. But sometimes, they solidify, they take on form, and they stare back at you from the most unexpected places. And for Evelyn Reed, that place was the mirror. Not just any mirror, mind you, but the antique looking-glass that had graced her grandmother's vanity for decades, an heirloom that carried with it the scent of lavender and old lace. And, as Evelyn was about to discover, a chilling secret. Evelyn, a woman in her late 30s with a quiet strength that belied a recent profound sorrow, had moved back into her grandmother's sprawling, slightly eccentric Victorian home after the sudden death of her husband, David. The house, nestled deep within a forest just outside of a small, picturesque town in Vermont, was a labyrinth of shadowed hallways and forgotten rooms, each creak of the floorboards a whisper of the past. David's passing had been unexpected. A car accident on a slick, moonless road. The official report called it tragic, an unfortunate confluence of circumstances. But for Evelyn, a gnawing unease had settled deep in her bones, a feeling that something wasn't quite right, a dissonant note in the symphony of her grief. She dismissed it, of course, as the lingering tendrils of shock and loss, a mind grappling with an unbearable void. But the unease persisted, a cold hand on her shoulder even in the warmest rooms. The mirror, with its ornate, dark wood frame and slightly clouded glass, had always been a fixture in her grandmother's bedroom, a room Evelyn now occupied. Her grandmother, Eleanor Vance, had been a woman of quiet wisdom and a deep, almost mystical connection to the natural world around her. Eleanor had always said the mirror held stories, that if you looked closely enough, you could see the echoes of those who had stood before it. Evelyn, in her youth, had always dismissed it as whimsical, a charming eccentricity. But now, alone in the vast silence of the house, surrounded by the ghosts of her own memories, those words began to take on a new, unsettling weight. It began subtly, as these things often do. A flicker, a brief distortion in the reflection when she caught her own gaze. She'd blink, rub her eyes, attribute it to fatigue or the play of shadows from the flickering fireplace. Then came the instances where she'd see something that wasn't quite her. A fleeting impression of a different hairstyle, a different set of clothes, a shadow in the background that melted away as soon as she focused on it. Her logical mind, honed by years as a meticulous archivist in a small-town historical society, fought against these anomalies. There had to be an explanation. The old house settling, perhaps, or simply her mind playing tricks, a byproduct of her grief-addled state. She had been diagnosed with what her doctor vaguely called post-traumatic stress symptoms, advising rest and quiet. This house, isolated and serene, was meant to be her sanctuary, a place to heal. Instead, it was becoming a source of escalating dread. One evening, as a storm raged outside, rattling the ancient window panes, Evelyn stood before the mirror, brushing her hair. The power had flickered, casting the room in an eerie half-light. As she met her reflection, she saw it. Not a flicker, not a distortion, but a distinct, fleeting image superimposed over her own. A woman, her face pale and drawn, with eyes that held an unspeakable terror. Her hair was a darker shade than Evelyn's, pulled back severely from a high forehead. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving only Evelyn's own bewildered face staring back. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden silence of the room. She backed away from the mirror, her breath catching in her throat, a cold sweat breaking out on her skin. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't shadows. This was something else entirely. She tried to rationalize it. Stress, certainly. The isolation of the house. The pervasive sense of loss. But the image had been too vivid, too real. It had a presence, a weight that resonated deep within her. The next day, she called her closest friend, Sarah, a pragmatic and grounded woman who worked as a nurse in the next town over. Evelyn tried to explain, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah, bless her heart, listened patiently, offering sympathetic platitudes about grief manifesting in strange ways. Maybe you should get out of the house more, Ev. Get some fresh air, see some people. Your grandma's house can be a bit much when you're alone. Evelyn knew Sarah meant well, but it only amplified her sense of isolation. How could she explain this without sounding completely unhinged? The occurrences became more frequent, more insistent. The shadowy figure in the mirror would appear for longer durations, sometimes even seemingly reacting to Evelyn's movements. A slight tilt of the head, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. It was always the same woman, always with that same haunting expression. Evelyn began to observe her more closely, trying to discern details. The clothes seemed to be from an earlier era, perhaps the 1920s or 30s. A simple, dark dress, high-necked, almost severe. And then, she noticed it. A faint, almost imperceptible scar just beneath the woman's left eye. A tiny, almost insignificant detail, yet it anchored the apparition in a disturbing reality. One restless night, unable to sleep, Evelyn found herself drawn back to the mirror, as if an invisible thread pulled her. She lit a single candle, its flame dancing in the still air, casting long, shifting shadows. As she approached, the reflection solidified. The woman was there, clearer than ever. Her eyes, those terrified eyes, seemed to plead, to communicate something beyond words. And then a sound, a faint, almost inaudible whisper, as if a breath of cold air had passed through the room. Evelyn strained to hear, her heart pounding. It wasn't a language she recognized, but it held a desperate urgency, a chilling plea. It was at this moment, staring into the haunted depths of the mirror, that a terrifying realization began to dawn on Evelyn. This wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, not a spectral remnant of the deceased. This was something far more intricate, far more unsettling. The ghost in the mirror wasn't a ghost at all. The chilling whisper from the mirror, though indecipherable, had solidified a terrifying truth in Evelyn's mind. This wasn't just a figment of her imagination or a symptom of her grief. The woman in the glass was real in some sense of the word, and she was desperate. The initial fear began to give way to a consuming, almost obsessive curiosity. Who was this woman? What did she want? And why was she appearing in her grandmother's mirror? Evelyn, the archivist, the meticulous seeker of facts, found herself grappling with something that defied all logic, all historical precedent. The world she knew, the one built on tangible evidence and verifiable truths, was crumbling around her. She started spending hours in front of the mirror, not in a vain self-admiration, but in a quiet, intense vigil. She tried to communicate, whispering questions into the glass, her voice hoarse with a mixture of fear and determination. "Who are you?" she'd ask, her reflection staring back, sometimes with the superimposed image of the other woman, sometimes just her own bewildered face. "What do you want?" The responses were always the same. Fleeting appearances, the haunting gaze, and that almost imperceptible scar. A tiny, dark mark beneath the woman's left eye that seemed to hold a world of unspoken sorrow. Evelyn, driven by an instinct she couldn't ignore, began to delve into the history of the house, and more specifically, the mirror itself. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had always been secretive about certain aspects of her past, especially anything predating her marriage to Evelyn's grandfather. The mirror, Eleanor had often said, was a family heirloom, passed down through generations. But which generations? And from whom? Evelyn scoured old family documents, letters, and dusty photographs stored in the attic. The attic itself was a treasure trove of forgotten lives, filled with trunks and boxes overflowing with mementos that held their own silent stories. She discovered an old daguerreotype, tucked away in a velvet-lined box beneath a pile of linens. It was a faded image, but distinct enough. A woman, dressed in the fashion of the late 19th or early 20th century, standing stiffly for the camera. Her face was solemn, her eyes dark and intelligent. And there it was, faint but undeniable, a tiny scar just beneath her left eye. Evelyn's breath hitched. It was the woman from the mirror. Her heart pounded as she stared at the image, a wave of cold dread washing over her. The resemblance was uncanny, almost identical to the fleeting image she saw in the glass. This woman was real. She had lived. But who was she? And what was her connection to the mirror and to Evelyn's family? The daguerreotype had a name etched on the back in delicate, looping script: Isabel Vance. Isabel Vance. The name resonated with a strange familiarity, like a half-forgotten dream. Evelyn recalled her grandmother mentioning a great-aunt Isabel once or twice, but always vaguely, almost dismissively. There was a sense of unspoken tension, a silence that usually followed any mention of that name. This piqued Evelyn's archivist instincts even further. Why the secrecy? What was so significant about Isabel Vance that her memory seemed almost suppressed? Her research intensified. She spent hours in the local historical society, poring over old town records, census reports, and newspaper archives. What she uncovered began to paint a disturbing picture. Isabel Vance had indeed lived in this very house, a generation before Eleanor. She was known, in the hushed tones of local gossip, as the tragic beauty. She had been engaged to a prominent young man from a wealthy family, a man named Thomas Sterling. Their wedding had been highly anticipated, a social event of the season. But then, a week before the wedding, Isabel had vanished, without a trace. The official explanation was that she had simply run away, overwhelmed by the pressures of marriage. But the local whispers told a different story, a darker one. Some said she had been heartbroken, abandoned by her fiancé. Others hinted at foul play, a jilted lover, or a jealous rival. The police investigation at the time had been cursory, quickly closed due to lack of evidence. The consensus was that she had simply disappeared into the anonymity of a larger city. Evelyn felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. Isabel's disappearance, the suppressed family history, and now her haunting appearance in the mirror. It was all connected. But how? And what did David, her late husband, have to do with this unfolding mystery? A cold dread settled in her gut as a new, horrifying thought began to take root. David had been researching his own family history before he died. He had been particularly interested in his maternal lineage, which, to Evelyn's surprise, had strong ties to this very region, to the same small town where Isabel Vance had lived and vanished. Could there be a connection, a terrible intertwining of their family histories that neither of them had known until now? The mirror became her confidant, her desperate connection to the past. She would talk to Isabel's reflection, telling her what she had found, explaining the details of the past, hoping for a sign, a flicker of recognition. And Isabel, the ghost in the mirror who wasn't a ghost at all, would appear more frequently, her eyes wide with an urgency that Evelyn now understood as a desperate plea for help, for recognition, for justice. The fear that had initially gripped Evelyn began to transform into a burning need to uncover the truth, to give Isabel the voice she had been denied for so long. She felt a profound connection to this woman, a shared burden of unspoken sorrow. One particularly stormy night, the power once again flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. Evelyn, accustomed to it by now, lit candles and made her way to the mirror. Isabel's image was clearer than ever, almost solid. Her eyes, filled with a desperate intensity, seemed to pierce through Evelyn's very soul. And then, slowly, agonizingly, Isabel's hand rose, her slender finger pointing towards a specific area of the mirror's frame. Evelyn leaned closer, her heart hammering. There, almost imperceptibly, was a tiny, almost invisible seam in the ornate wood. She traced it with her finger, feeling a small indentation. With a surge of adrenaline, she pressed. A faint click echoed in the silent room. A small, hidden compartment, ingeniously concealed, sprang open. Inside, nestled on a faded velvet lining, was a single, tarnished silver locket. Evelyn's hand trembled as she picked it up. It was cold to the touch and surprisingly heavy. As she turned it over, she saw an intricate engraving on the back. The initials IV intertwined with T.S. Isabel Vance and Thomas Sterling. This was more than just a locket. It was a key, a silent testament to a secret long buried. Inside the locket, folded meticulously into a tiny square, was a single, brittle piece of paper. Evelyn carefully unfolded it, her breath held captive in her chest. The handwriting was elegant, florid, yet the ink was faded with age. It was a letter, and as Evelyn began to read, the words on the page unleashed a torrent of horrifying revelations, pulling her deeper into a web of deceit, betrayal, and a darkness that had festered in the shadows for over a century. The first few lines confirmed Evelyn's worst fears, hinting at a truth far more sinister than a simple disappearance. Isabel Vance hadn't run away. She had been trapped. And the ghost in the mirror wasn't a ghost at all, but a reflection of a truth desperately trying to break free. The letter from the locket was a chilling testament to Isabel Vance's final days, a desperate plea for help, written in a hand that grew increasingly shaky with each word. It wasn't a letter of love, but one of betrayal and terror. Isabel hadn't vanished. She had been imprisoned in her own home, held captive by none other than Thomas Sterling, her fiancé. The man she was supposed to marry, the man everyone admired, was a monster. He had discovered Isabel was pregnant, not with his child, but with the child of another man, a secret tryst with a stable boy, a forbidden love that blossomed in the shadows of society's rigid expectations. Thomas, obsessed with appearances and his family's impeccable reputation, saw this as an unforgivable stain on his honor. He couldn't let her disgrace him, and he couldn't allow a child of illegitimate birth to inherit any part of his future. His solution was a horrific one: to keep her hidden, to let her disappear quietly, and to eventually dispose of her. The details in the letter were agonizing. Isabel described her confinement, the muffled cries for help, the insidious gaslighting by Thomas, who convinced everyone she had suffered a nervous breakdown and needed to be cared for away from prying eyes. She detailed the daily torment, the growing despair, and the constant fear. She also mentioned a key, hidden within the very framework of the mirror, a key to a secret passage, a desperate escape route she had only just discovered. But the letter ended abruptly, leaving Evelyn with a terrifying sense of dread. It was clear Isabel had never made it out. Evelyn's mind reeled. This wasn't just a historical mystery. It was a crime, a century-old atrocity that had been swept under the rug of respectable society. And the mirror, the very object that had tormented her, was now revealing its terrible truth. The ghost in the mirror wasn't a ghost at all. She was a victim, crying out from the confines of history. But the letter contained another, even more shocking revelation, one that twisted Evelyn's world into a macabre knot. Isabel wrote of a child, born in secret, hidden away from Thomas's wrath, a baby boy, and with a sickening lurch, Evelyn remembered a detail from her husband David's family research, a detail that had seemed insignificant at the time but now echoed with a chilling resonance. David's maternal great-grandmother, a woman named Clara Sterling, was Thomas Sterling's sister, and she had an illegitimate son, born around the same time as Isabel's disappearance, a child she raised as her own, claiming he was an orphan she had taken in. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. Isabel's son, the child she fought to protect, was David's ancestor. David, her late husband, was a descendant of the very man who had imprisoned and murdered Isabel Vance. The Sterling family, her husband's family, had not only been complicit in Isabel's disappearance, but had actively covered up a brutal crime to protect their name. The revelation was a punch to the gut. The man she loved, the man whose loss had consumed her, was connected to this unspeakable act. Her grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, now transformed into a burning, righteous fury. She felt betrayed not just by the past, but by the very foundations of her own life. The ghost in the mirror wasn't a spectral entity but the manifestation of an unitoned crime, a truth so profound and painful it transcended time. Evelyn knew she couldn't just let this fester. Isabel deserved justice, and David, unknowingly, had been part of this lineage of deception. Her immediate instinct was to find the secret passage Isabel mentioned. She re-examined the mirror, running her hands along its frame, searching for any further clues. She remembered Isabel's hand in the reflection, pointing, and then the faint click. She pressed on the seam again, this time with more force, and felt a tiny lever give way. A section of the wall behind the mirror, disguised to look like ordinary paneling, swung inward with a faint groan, revealing a dark, narrow passage. Armed with a flashlight, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, Evelyn stepped into the suffocating darkness. The air was thick with dust and the musty scent of decay. The passage wound downwards, a spiral of rough-hewn stone steps, leading into the very foundations of the old house. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing cobwebs and ancient, skeletal remains of small creatures. She descended deeper, the silence broken only by her own ragged breathing and the distant creak of the house settling above her. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small, dank chamber, barely big enough to stand in. The air here was heavy, oppressive, filled with a palpable sense of despair. And there, in the center of the room, illuminated by the struggling beam of her flashlight, was a large, rotting wooden chest. It was old, very old, and heavily latched. With trembling hands, Evelyn managed to pry open the rusted lock. Inside, nestled amongst layers of ancient, decaying fabric, was a skeletal remains. And then she saw it. A single, tarnished silver locket, identical to the one she held, lay clutched in the skeletal hand. Next to it, a small, leather-bound journal. And most chillingly, a simple, faded wedding dress, the fabric almost disintegrated, but the intricate lace still discernible. Isabel Vance. This was where she had been hidden, where she had died. The final, brutal truth of her fate. Evelyn felt a sob tear through her throat, a raw cry of anguish for the injustice of it all. This was the ghost in the mirror, not a spectral entity, but the embodiment of a life stolen, a truth buried. The journal, carefully preserved in the chest, contained Isabel's last entries, detailing her final moments, her unwavering love for her son, and her desperate hope that one day, the truth would be uncovered. Her last entry spoke of Thomas Sterling, his growing paranoia, and his chilling threats. It was a testament to his depravity, a clear confession of his crime. But the most shocking twist came when Evelyn read a postscript, scrawled in a different hand on the very last page of the journal. A note, dated years after Isabel's disappearance, signed by Eleanor Vance, Evelyn's own grandmother. It confessed that Eleanor, as a young girl, had stumbled upon the secret passage and discovered Isabel's fate. She had been sworn to secrecy by her family, by her parents who were complicit in the cover-up, terrified of the social repercussions if the truth came out. Eleanor had lived with this terrible burden her entire life, unable to speak, unable to give Isabel peace. The mirror Eleanor wrote was not just an heirloom, but a conduit, a vessel. She had always hoped that one day, someone, perhaps a descendant like Evelyn, would be sensitive enough to the echoes of the past to hear Isabel's silent cry, to see the truth reflected back at them. The ghost in the mirror wasn't a ghost at all. It was Eleanor's desperate attempt to guide Evelyn, to finally set Isabel free, even from beyond the grave. Evelyn was caught in a horrifying intergenerational conspiracy, one that her own grandmother had been a part of. The weight of this revelation was almost unbearable. The musty air of the hidden chamber seemed to vibrate with the echoes of Isabel's tragic life and the chilling revelations from her journal and her grandmother's confession. Evelyn, kneeling amidst the dust and decay, felt a profound shift within her. The grief she carried for David, which had felt like an insurmountable mountain, now merged with a fierce determination to right a century-old wrong. The ghost in the mirror wasn't a ghost at all. She was a beacon, guiding Evelyn to a truth that demanded to be unearthed. The locket clutched in Isabel's skeletal hand, the journal with its damning entries, and her grandmother Eleanor's postscript. These were not just historical artifacts. They were pieces of a puzzle, carefully laid out across time, waiting for the right person to assemble them. And Evelyn, the archivist, the quiet seeker of truths, was that person. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about Isabel anymore. It was about every truth buried, every voice silenced by power and fear. It was about her own family's legacy, tainted by a hidden crime. She carefully gathered the evidence. The journal, the locket, and even a small, tarnished silver ring from Isabel's finger, engraved with a single rose. These items, along with the daguerreotype of Isabel, would be her proof. The first step was to contact Sarah, her pragmatic friend. Sarah, despite her initial skepticism, was a nurse, a woman who understood the intricacies of the human body and the irrefutable evidence it could provide. Evelyn knew she would need a clear, unvarnished perspective, someone who could help her navigate the maze of legal and historical complexities that lay ahead. Sarah's reaction to the full story, the hidden chamber, and the skeletal remains, was one of stunned disbelief that slowly morphed into grim resolve. She was horrified, but her medical background kicked in, confirming Evelyn's identification of Isabel through skeletal markers and the unique scar. Together, they contacted the local authorities, carefully presenting the evidence, the journal, and the chilling story of Isabel Vance. The initial response was, understandably, skeptical. A century-old murder, discovered by a woman claiming a ghost in a mirror, led her to it? It sounded like a gothic novel, not a police report. But Evelyn, armed with facts and a quiet, unshakable conviction, persisted. She explained the meticulous details from Isabel's journal, the hidden compartment in the mirror, the secret passage, and the connection to the prominent Sterling family. Sarah, with her professional demeanor, lent credibility to Evelyn's claims, providing a logical, scientific assessment of the remains. Slowly, painstakingly, the pieces began to fit for the authorities. The cold case was reopened, fueled by the undeniable evidence presented by Evelyn. The Sterling family, now a powerful and influential dynasty in the region, initially scoffed at the accusations, dismissing them as the ramblings of a grieving widow. But the evidence was too compelling to ignore. DNA testing, comparing Isabel's remains with living descendants of the Sterling family, including, ironically, a distant relative of David's, proving the chilling connection, confirmed the brutal truth. The ensuing legal battle was long and arduous, a media circus that dragged the secrets of the past into the harsh light of the present. The legacy of Thomas Sterling, the admired patriarch, crumbled under the weight of his monstrous deeds. The truth of Isabel Vance's imprisonment and murder, and the complicity of her own family in covering it up, became a dark stain on the town's history. Justice, though delayed by a century, was finally served. Thomas Sterling, long dead, was officially branded a murderer, and the Sterling family's carefully constructed facade of respectability shattered. Evelyn, though exhausted by the ordeal, felt a profound sense of peace. Isabel's restless spirit, the ghost in the mirror who wasn't a ghost at all, was finally at rest. The mirror, once a source of terror, became a symbol of truth and remembrance. She decided to keep it, but not in her bedroom. She donated it, along with Isabel's journal and locket, to the local historical society, transforming it from a personal nightmare into a public testament. A new exhibit was created, dedicated to Isabel Vance, telling her story not as a vanished mystery, but as a brave woman whose truth was finally brought to light. The resolution didn't erase Evelyn's grief for David, but it reshaped it. She understood now that he, like her, had been an unwitting pawn in this intergenerational drama. His family's past was tainted, but he himself was innocent of those crimes. The understanding brought a new layer of compassion to her sorrow, allowing her to mourn him without the lingering shadow of the unknown. She found solace in the quiet strength she had discovered within herself, the courage to face the unimaginable and to fight for what was right, even when it meant uncovering painful truths about her own lineage. Life in the old Victorian house slowly began to change. The oppressive silence lifted, replaced by a quiet sense of calm. The whispers of the past were no longer chilling, but rather, they seemed to carry a gentle sigh of relief. Evelyn continued her work at the Historical Society, but now with a renewed purpose, a deeper understanding of the power of buried stories, and the importance of ensuring that every voice, no matter how faint, has a chance to be heard. The ghost in the mirror wasn't a ghost at all. She was a legacy, a reminder that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always find its way into the light. And as for you, who've journeyed with me through this chilling tale, remember that sometimes the most terrifying truths aren't found in the supernatural, but in the dark corners of human nature. If you found yourself caught in the gripping mystery of Isabel Vance's story, if the twists and turns kept you on the edge of your seat, then don't let our conversation end here. Give this video a like to help us share these incredible, untold stories. Subscribe to the channel to make sure you never miss another deep dive into the hidden truths of our world. And hit that notification bell, so you're always the first to know when a new chapter in mystery unfolds. Until next time, keep looking beyond the reflection, because sometimes the ghost in the mirror isn't a ghost at all.